Iran believed missiles would be enough, drones would be enough. 47 years of revolutionary speeches, 47 years of resistance doctrine, 47 years of telling its people and telling the world that the Islamic Republic could survive any sanction, any embargo, any military pressure, any diplomatic isolation. For nearly half a century, Tehran built an image of endurance, of strategic patience, of a regime that could bend under pressure but never break. And then, in less than 3 weeks, something happened that decades of sanctions, covert operations, financial restrictions, and international resolutions failed to accomplish. A pressure point was found, not in the missile silos, not inside the nuclear facilities, not within the proxy network stretching from Lebanon to Yemen, but in something far simpler, something far more vulnerable: oil, the lifeline of the regime, the artery that funds the military, the internal security apparatus, the regional alliances, the economic survival of the system itself, and according to multiple energy analysts, satellite tracking firms, shipping observers, and financial institutions, that artery is now under more pressure than at any moment in the modern history of the Islamic Republic. This is Professor John. And what is happening to Iran's energy system right now may become one of the most consequential economic collapses of this entire conflict, not because of bombs, not because of missile strikes, but because of mathematics, infrastructure, storage capacity, and time. What we are witnessing is no longer simply a military standoff. It is an economic countdown, a physical countdown, a countdown measured not in speeches or threats, but in barrels. And every intelligence service, every energy ministry, every trading floor, and every military command center on Earth appears to be watching the same clock. Because according to maritime intelligence data that immediately sent shockwaves through energy markets, Iran may now have as little as 12 to 22 days of available crude storage capacity remaining. Think about what that means. 12 to 22 days before the tanks are full, before the storage terminals reach maximum pressure, before the infrastructure designed to move oil outward begins to choke on oil with nowhere left to go. This estimate was not published by political commentators or sensational media outlets. It came from maritime intelligence firms that monitor global tanker traffic using satellite imagery, port analytics, cargo tracking systems, and terminal activity in real time. These firms do not guess, they observe. They measure, they calculate, and what they appear to be seeing inside Iran's export system is deeply alarming. Before the current crisis escalated, Iran was moving approximately 1.8 to 1.9 million barrels of crude oil per day through a combination of official channels, indirect trade networks, and strategic buyers willing to accept discounted supply. That revenue was not simply economic income. It was the financial engine behind everything else: the salaries, the fuel subsidies, the import networks, the military procurement, the foreign operations, the intelligence budgets, the domestic control mechanisms. But since maritime pressure began intensifying, export volumes appear to have fallen sharply. Some estimates suggest reductions approaching 70% in certain export windows. Tankers that once moved freely are now facing rerouting, insurance complications, inspection delays, monitoring pressure, financial exposure, cargo hesitation, buyers demanding deeper discounts, ship owners calculating greater risk. And while exports slow, production does not instantly stop. Oil fields continue producing, pipelines continue moving, storage terminals continue filling. And that is where the real crisis begins, because oil infrastructure is built around movement, extraction, transport, loading, export, payment, repeat. But when the export phase is disrupted, the entire chain begins backing up like pressure inside a sealed system. Wells continue pumping, reservoir pressure continues building, storage tanks continue filling, and eventually one question becomes unavoidable. Where does the next barrel go? That question may now be haunting energy officials inside Tehran, because if storage reaches maximum capacity, production cuts become unavoidable. And unlike political speeches, oil reservoirs do not respond to ideology. Reservoirs respond to physics, and physics can be unforgiving. This is where the story becomes even more dangerous. Because according to petroleum engineering experts, forced emergency production shutdowns can permanently damage oil field performance. When mature reservoirs are shut down too quickly or under unstable pressure conditions, subsurface dynamics begin changing. Water begins migrating, gas caps shift, pressure balances collapse, production zones become unstable. Engineers refer to one of the most feared outcomes as water coning, where underground water begins moving upward into producing oil zones, permanently contaminating future production efficiency. In simple terms, a field producing efficiently today may never produce the same way again after an uncontrolled shutdown. Some analysts believe that if Iran is forced into large-scale emergency production cuts, long-term production losses could reach hundreds of thousands of barrels per day, not temporary losses, permanent losses, revenue lost not for weeks, but for years, possibly decades. That is what makes this crisis so different. The missiles can stop, the negotiations can resume, the political statements can change, but geological damage inside producing reservoirs cannot simply be reversed by diplomacy. And if that damage begins occurring now, Iran's economic future could already be changing in ways that will outlast this conflict itself. Now let's move to what was supposed to be Iran's backup plan, Chabahar. For years, Chabahar Port was presented as Iran's strategic insurance policy, a deep water facility positioned outside the Strait of Hormuz, a route designed to reduce dependence on the Gulf choke point, a logistics hub connecting Iran to India, Central Asia, Russia, and broader Eurasian trade networks. Whenever analysts questioned what would happen if Hormuz became unstable, Tehran pointed to Chabahar. This was supposed to be Plan B. But now, according to multiple shipping observations and port monitoring reports, Chabahar itself appears to be facing severe congestion, cargo queues, tankers waiting offshore, insurance delays, inspection bottlenecks, routing uncertainty. Some commercial operators appear increasingly hesitant to enter Iranian-linked port networks altogether. And in shipping, hesitation is expensive. Every delayed tanker means delayed revenue. Every delayed cargo means cash flow disruption. Every additional insurance premium reduces competitiveness. Every inspection window creates operational uncertainty. Suddenly, Iran's strategic backup begins looking less like a solution and more like a parking lot for stranded capacity. And then came another strategic shock. Regional competitors began adapting faster than Tehran expected. Pipeline networks bypassing Hormuz began operating at higher capacity. Alternative export terminals outside the Gulf started absorbing additional market demand. Buyers who once relied on Iranian discounts began diversifying, and every additional alternative barrel entering the market reduced Iran's leverage even further. Because Iran's strategic assumption always depended on one core idea, that if Hormuz became unstable, global energy markets would panic, prices would surge, and Tehran would gain leverage. But that assumption appears increasingly challenged. Regional producers with bypass infrastructure are continuing exports. Alternative routes remain active. Market supply has not disappeared, which means Iran may be facing the worst possible scenario for a sanctioned producer: falling volume, while pricing power weakens at the same time. This is what energy economists describe as a two-front revenue collapse. Export volumes decline, market leverage declines, insurance costs rise, discounts deepen, buyers hesitate, revenue shrinks from both directions simultaneously, and that's when economic pressure starts becoming political pressure. Now, multiple observers monitoring internal conditions suggest that the effects may already be moving beyond oil terminals and into daily life. Energy conservation messaging, infrastructure slowdowns, industrial output concerns, rising import costs, pressure on pharmaceuticals, food distribution strain, consumer anxiety, currency pressure, youth unemployment risks. These signals matter because governments can survive external threats. Governments can survive sanctions. Governments can survive military rhetoric. But prolonged internal economic stress changes political equations. And perhaps the clearest signal came from public messaging around electricity use, calls for conservation, reduced energy consumption, operational cuts, lower infrastructure demand. When a major hydrocarbon producer begins publicly discussing conservation during an export crisis, analysts start asking difficult questions. How much pressure is actually building inside the system? How long can subsidies continue? How stable is the fiscal structure behind the scenes? And then we arrive at perhaps the most strategically important dimension of all, the proxy network. For decades, Iran's regional influence has depended on more than missiles, more than naval assets, more than deterrence doctrine. It has depended on money, salaries, procurement, logistics, communications, maintenance, transportation, fuel, intelligence support, political influence. Every external network requires financial oxygen, and that oxygen comes from energy revenue. If that revenue falls sharply, every network begins feeling pressure: delayed payments, procurement cuts, operational slowdowns, reduced mobility, lower readiness, strategic hesitation. Suddenly, what began as a shipping crisis becomes a regional influence crisis, because cutting the financial source can sometimes accomplish what direct military confrontation cannot. It forces prioritization. Do you protect domestic stability? Do you fund external operations? Do you preserve strategic deterrence? Do you subsidize the population? Do you maintain military modernization? No government can maximize all of these under shrinking revenues forever. Eventually, choices must be made, and choices reveal vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, floating storage indicators appear increasingly concerning. Some observers suggest older vessels may be returning to service as temporary crude storage platforms. Aging tankers, retired hulls, idle capacity brought back online simply to hold oil that has nowhere left to go. If accurate, that would represent one of the clearest physical indicators that onshore storage infrastructure is approaching serious stress. Because floating storage is not a recovery strategy. It is a delay mechanism, a pause button, a temporary extension of the countdown, but not an escape from it, which brings us to the three paths now facing Tehran. First, de-escalation, diplomatic agreements, shipping normalization, storage relief, production stabilization, revenue recovery. Second, strategic endurance, continued resistance, deepening storage pressure, forced production cuts, rising domestic strain, shrinking leverage. Third, escalation, regional confrontation, expanded maritime risk, infrastructure targeting, insurance shocks, global energy spikes. And none of these scenarios produces an easy outcome. None of them restore the old system overnight. None of them erase the physical damage already accumulating inside infrastructure, reservoirs, logistics chains, and financial planning systems. And that is why what is happening right now matters so much. Because this is no longer simply about Iran. It is about modern economic warfare. It is about maritime choke points. It is about how the global energy system can be pressured without a single bomb falling on an oil field. It is about how the world's supply lines have become strategic battlefields. And right now, Iran's most valuable strategic asset, its oil, may be entering the most dangerous countdown in the modern history of the regime. Not a political countdown, not a military countdown, a physical countdown, measured in barrels, in storage tanks, in tanker queues, in reservoir pressure, in export delays, in insurance contracts, in lost revenue, one day at a time, one shipment at a time, one decision at a time, and somewhere tonight, inside secure energy ministries, intelligence bunkers, naval headquarters, trading floors, and presidential offices across the world. Everyone may be watching the same number, 12 to 22 days, and nobody yet knows what happens when that number reaches zero.